Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Accelerating Your Digital Agenda with Continuous Testing. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You should see your GoToWebinar control panel in the upper right corner of your computer. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to join over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. If you have the telephone, if you're experiencing any issues, please go ahead and type into the questions box what issues you're experiencing and I'll assist you. You are going to have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You can send your question in at any time during the presentation. We'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with the link to view the recording. I would now like to pass the mic over to Kimberly Falk, Director of Product Marketing at Sauce Labs, who's going to be introducing the webinar.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce Diego Lo Giudice, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Diego has been with Forrester since July 2005 and primarily contributes to and advises on Forrester's offerings for application development and delivery professionals. He partners with Forrester's global application leaders and is a leading expert on software development lifecycle processes and practices, covering topics such as agile development, agile and lean transformations, agile development sourcing strategies and services, agile testing practices and tools, DevOps, and software testing and quality, with a key focus on systems of engagement. Diego also covers software delivery metrics, artificial intelligence, and open source governance, IEGO. Diego, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. So I would definitely like to thank, of course, Sauce Labs for having me here and giving me the opportunity to share some of my research on continuous testing and contextualizing that within the objective that many of you guys have, I'm sure, of or your company has in terms of digital transformation and digital acceleration. And I'm going to dive right into it because we only have less than an hour, and so I would like to cover as much ground as possible for sharing with you some of the data that we've pulled together for this presentation. So we need to test more, we need to test better, and we need to test faster. And we need to do that, continuously. I'm going to tell you why we need to test more and what the challenges are to increase the level of testing and to be able to do that better and faster, and share some of the best practices or good practices that I see organizations around the world, be them software houses or end user companies, brick and mortar and new digital companies that are applying around the world. So the question is, why do we need to test more? Well, really, I guess, there's a number of reasons, and this kind of starts showing you some of the disasters that happen when we try to go too fast, right? So everybody's asking us to go even faster. And this is a building that collapsed, a collapse that happened in Shanghai in 2009, and the building, as you can see, it just bended on one side. It was brand new; nobody was living in there. Even the buildings that you see that are still standing up are also unpopulated, and basically, the question is: was it too much speed, or was it perhaps poor quality? Well, maybe both. Another disaster, and I think this is actually a bit more closer to in time. This is the 737 MAX, the Boeing 737 MAX that fell down in Ethiopia a few months back. Could the end-to-end customer journey between pilot and self-pilot could that have been tested better? Was this about poor quality software? Well, we all know that airplanes have millions of lines of code. Cars have millions of lines of code. Lots of the stuff that we use and we run today has, thousands of millions of lines of code, and you've got lots of lines of code in your data center. Well, the way airplanes get tested is there's this thing called a wind tunnel where flights are simulated, right, under simulating all types of extreme conditions. But I guess this specific condition was not simulated. The condition of interaction between the pilot, the human trying to gain control back from the self-pilot didn't work, right? Maybe better quality could have avoided that accident. So there's two things actually to this website. This is BBC, right? BBC learned the hard way that finding that every additional second of load time of a page led to 10% of user leaving its site. That's pretty, that's a pretty interesting number. 53% of the mobile site visits that took longer than 3 seconds to load were abandoned. Now, there's also another message on this. You might all remember a few months back the Notre Dame fire. Well, it looks like even that was caused by, or could have been reduced. The impact could have been of the fire could have been reduced by having the fire workers intervene sooner if the alarm that went off had not pointed them in the wrong direction, in the wrong place where the fire was taking over. Again, a software problem. Now, as developers, as a developer community, development community, testers, we need to be aware that business expectation, the expectations of our business organizations and our users are high in terms of the level of technical quality that they're looking for. And our data shows that. This is our Agile adoption survey. It's a panel of Agile teams of 232 technical professionals. This is a survey that we're right now updating in 2019. I do this survey every 2 years. So this is 2017, it's the latest data. 53% expect Agile to improve technical quality. And 63% expect Agile to improve functional quality. So there's expectations that actually, adopting Agile, working with Agile frameworks and Agile approaches improves quality. But there's also an expectation that because Agile helps align business with developers more, or helps them collaborate more, that Agile will also help improve customer experience. That's what 73% of the organizations, think. They have an expectation that during their digital transformation, the reason why they do Agile is also because they want to improve customer experience. And unfortunately, expectations are not always met. Now, I'm also an Agile enthusiast, and I, been doing a lot of research around it. And I know that actually some level of expectations are met with Agile, but not as much as we all would like. Everybody right now is trying to scale Agile, is trying to make it work more and more extensively throughout the enterprise. So, but while everybody is really focused and doubling down on speed, right? What the business, the executives and customers really also want is quality at speed. In other words, speed can't come without quality. And so, that basically brings testing fully and, squarely in as a first-class citizen in the overall transformation of teams into becoming more agile, adopting Agile and DevOps, and getting into that continuous delivery nirvana that everybody wants to get at, right? And so what are the challenges? Why is it so hard to build software fast, but with high quality? Well, let me take a little bit of a step back. You know, the title of the presentation was around digital transformation. So let me just kind of connect all this together. What you can see here is that the reason for speed is about, you know, digital acceleration or transformation. And you can see that accelerating business transformation together with improving customer experience are the primary focus of most process improvement efforts that are going on, at least for these 354 business and technology leaders that we interviewed. And we know that that's going to stay that way for the next few years and even more, I would say, because, you know, it's funny, I started writing and doing research. I actually were practicing Agile myself years ago, more than 15 years ago, and I'm still here talking and writing about Agile. It just change just takes time. So I think, you know, these two objectives of improving customer experience and accelerating digital business transformation is going to stay on all of our agendas for quite some time. But unfortunately, the reality is that, at least, you know, in Forrester, what we're seeing is that the sorry state of digital transformation, from a customer survey that a colleague of mine, Ted Shadler, wrote and conducted last year is around digital transformation, is that digital transformation is really hard, in part because, you know, we still are learning about digital transformations, right? We've gone through different waves of adoption of it. And, you know, and it's even harder, you know, and so never, you know, we don't know really how to accomplish it in full. But while, you know, I see that over half of the organizations are underway with it, there's you know, there's 21% here that the 21% number of completion that you see on the right side is the number that concerns me most, because, you know, these guys think that they're done with transformation, and we all know that you're never really done with transformation, especially digital transformation, because business keeps changing and we need to keep changing. And so really what we're aiming at is getting ready for change all the time. And we know that what is out there that is, you know, kind of that organizations are trying to from a development perspective, contribute to making digital transformation happen, digital acceleration happen faster, is that adopting Agile and DevOps, right? But I'm going to share now some numbers, and this is really, you know, like probably numbers that you are among the first to see, because we just closed this survey less than a month ago. 3,203 developers. This is what they answered when we asked them to characterize how they are, as you know, how their group are adopting and implementing DevOps and what they thought about it, right? And you can see that there's only really 33%, I would say, that there's only 33% that we think are really getting it. And why is that? Because really Agile and DevOps are two sides of the same coin. And in order to be successful with end-to-end agility, you really need to adopt both, right? Now, there's this 22% that claim they're doing something that resembles DevOps, of course, and that's not too bad. And there's 24% that think they're doing, you know, just DevOps. But the ones that really get it are the ones in that 33% percentage number. So a third are really kind of trying to move towards DevOps and Agile in the right way. And the other interesting thing is that the speed by which releases are deployed into production are also, you know, not exciting in terms of how fast and how fast we are delivering applications into production. More than once a month, only 13%. Once a month, 24%. This is releasing software into production, right? Once a month, 24%. Once a quarter, 31%. and twice per year or fewer, 30%. So, this is our global survey. This is over 3,000 global developers worldwide in all types of industries. And, what I can say is that we've been seeing this now for a number of years. I had here a previous, a different slide in the past that went and showed all the data from 2014 to 2018. And it shows more or less similar numbers. And you can see I've replaced it with, because I got this new 2019 data, so I wanted to see what's the difference between 2018 and 2019. Well, apparently it looks like teams are releasing faster, but it really is, they're really barely releasing faster, because the increase that you see from 26% to 31%, 18% to 24%, 7% to 10%, is largely given by the fact that we took out from the option, we took one option out. And so, people basically had less options to choose from. And so the numbers increased a little bit. So maybe there has been a little bit of improvement, but it's not, it's not that high. I would, I feel safe in saying that basically we're barely improving year over year in terms of how fast organizations can deliver and deploy software into production. And of course, testing, I think, is part of the problem. It's, I do think that testing is part of the problem. And you can see that even in my Agile survey, which is this other, the survey that I started talking about at the beginning, done on a smaller, more qualified panel of Agile teams, you can see that lack of Agile testing skills, lack of dedicated cross-functional teams, and other technical issues, and testing is part of the issue. And we know that because we've got some other data, again, coming from the developer survey and comparing it to 2018. And what this is showing you is that, basically, when we ask developers, those 3,200 developers, to tell us, how are you spending your time in a typical day? These responses are just showing the 1 hour to 4, where they're spending between 1 and 4 hours. Well, the sad story is that if you look at that data, it's, this does show between 1 and 4, but it's closer to the 1 hour. So they're spending 1 hour, 53% are spending 1 hour every day unit testing code, 48%, and 47% in 2018 were spending automating non-functional tests, 49% automating UI functional tests, and 2018 that was 48%. So in other words, it hasn't changed much between the 2 years, and it's quite low, right? We all have been kind of pushing this thing that we would like developers to test more, and that's barely happening too. And so if you felt that this was low, take a look at this, right? Which is the gap between managers and non-managers, mostly developers, project managers, on asking them the same question. We got, different answers. And so there's kind of a divide between, there's not a similar understanding. Managers might be more optimistic because that's what they like to show their organizations probably to be, better than what they probably are, and developers are more realistic about what they're really doing. But you can see that, there's also another issue, which is, and this is not just about testing, actually, we find this when you ask questions around DevOps, Agile, any type of innovation, managers always tend to be much more positive than what they really, might be in the organization. And you can see also, again, going back to the Agile survey, that test automation has also kind of plateaued around these numbers that you can see, right? Unit testing, 53%, 2015 and 2017. Now, I'm wondering, why would developers only unit test, basically spend half of testing half of what they're doing, they're building new code for. And you can see also that the manual testing from 2015 to 2017 has also not decreased much. It's gone down from 49% to 46%. And so, so basically the level of automation, right, is not, the level of test automation is not improving much. And as organizations are now getting into continuous delivery, so there's a number of you guys out there that are building continuous delivery pipelines. You're doing, check-ins, daily or weekly check-ins or monthly check-ins, depends how, again, in which one of those ranges you fall in. But basically, the ones that are a bit more advanced are starting to realize that they also need to shift performance testing to the left, because that's becoming the next blocker to continuous delivery and to Agile itself. Figuring and finding out that performance is kind of not working, and what the issues are at the end when you're ready to go into production is disrupting your entire Agile process. Centralized performance teams aren't, can't scale if you have now 100, 50, 100, and even larger organizations might have fewer hundreds of Agile teams. How can you support all of them from a centralized team? And so it completely disrupts continuous delivery. So, these are some, and not all, but the most frequent challenges that we see for organizations to completely transform their modern application delivery. So how can we address those challenges? Well, first thing I think is that, and this is actually kind of happening, and I think, our executives start getting it, which is to really become an excellent digital business, your software delivery has to become excellence, right? The execution on software delivery has to become excellent. And being software testing a first-class citizen of that, it means that your test execution, the way you execute your testing, the way you work on your quality and all types of testing has to also have a level of excellence, right? So and that's because software execution excellence equals business execution excellence. So that's kind of something you can't probably do much about if your management doesn't believe this, but I can tell you that your management starts understanding a lot about the fact that software delivery is a crucial, very crucial internal business process to excel as an organization. And so if that's, with that in mind, then, we have to modernize the way we test, right? So improving testing requires some fundamental changes in the design and the architecture approach to software. Luckily, that's coming with microservices, containers, with cloud, but it's testing that needs to be modernized. And this is where continuous testing does come in. And as you can see, what is continuous testing? Well, it's a capability made of people, process, practices, and technology that starts at the ideation and planning phase and goes through the Moebius here, through the design build, the continuous integration, the deploy automation and feedback loop. And you're testing continuously throughout that life cycle, right? And so what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to go step by step on these and share some of the practices that organizations, that you need to embrace if you want to, modernize your testing. So at the ideation and planning phase, which is kind of a planning initiation, if you're doing Scrum, for example, your sprint definition of done should include very clear sprint testing goals, right? What does done mean? When can I, is this sprint tested enough to go to, so that we can go to the next sprint and we can deploy what we have in this sprint into a stage gate or into a production? Do we have a clear test data strategy? Do we have an automation strategy for the sprint within the release and for the release? Do we want to automate some control gates? We define test scenarios using domain-specific languages early on, which match with my requirements, and that help my product owners, testers, and developers have a common language to share around testing. Have I included any performance testing acceptance criteria early on that I want to look at? Do I want to define feature toggles A/B multivariate and use some more advanced Agile techniques? Do I, prioritize? I have to prioritize sprint over sprint. bugs that come from production, because in Agile, as you know, you don't have a distinction between new development and maintenance anymore. And so it's all done through the same backlog, right? And so in that ideation planning, all those tests and activities have to happen. And so now, one thing that I often have bumped into when I talk to developers and broad, big groups of developers, is that sometimes there's confusion around what people think of testing. I would say basically for many developers, when they're thinking about testing, it's really unit testing. It's about making sure that the code that they're writing is doing exactly what the developer had in mind it should be doing. Is it going through the right constructs? Are the right parameters being passed by? Or, is the code technically correct, right? And doing what I want it to do. Well, that's one piece of testing, and definitely is the developer's job. I would say I wouldn't even call it testing. I think that's just a good development practice, that if I'm writing new code, I want to test my own code to see if it's working. The next level up is, of course, functional testing. This is where we want developers to do more of, but sometimes they don't necessarily, agree to that or like testing, let's put it that way. But they have now an opportunity. Functional testing can be done from developers through API testing, and often they can contribute to the automation of the functional tests. But today, mostly functional testing is done manually. And if it's done manually, it might be a business tester, a product owner, someone that is involved in the team. But mostly the data shows that it's technical testers, folks that know what testing is about, that have the sensitivity of, of not just testing happy paths as maybe a developer might, and that know what things need to be tested. And if they're manual, they might be doing that manually, but they might be want to use some, recent automation tools to improve that functional testing and make it faster. Then we've got non-functional testing, and this is an area where you can, we can group things like performance testing, things like, integration, security testing. And that's typically, again, it's a specialized testing. Some of it could be done from technical testers. And we just wrote some recent research, and you saw that I was talking about shift-left performance testing, because we think, or at least companies that are trying to aggressively increase the way they continuously deliver software, they think that they should be doing some, developers need to get involved in not only testing or testers in sprints, not only testing the functionality that they're building, but also have an idea of the performance of that functionality early on. And then you've got integration testing. Some people call this end-to-end, business testing or system testing. Again, this is mostly a technical tester's job. Some of it could, developer testers can also get involved. Again, this depends on the type of tools, especially if we're talking about service virtualization, which now are tools that enable to test, integrated different components and components that you might not still have the code for, but you have the description. SVT it kind of helps you build that wind tunnel that I was talking about when I was talking about how you test, how airplanes get tested, right? So it's creating a simulated environment where you can automate end-to-end testing, integration testing of different components. And this is where really real end-to-end testing done mostly by business and technical testers to end the overall, business process with all the applications that might be involved, right? So this is, some of this is built on, I kind of simplified it, but we need to understand that there are all these different types of testing. And now there's also some other new way, visual testing and so forth, which I think are also crucial and key. All right, so let's go to the next step of design build. Well, this is just to highlight one thing I would like to kind of, I would like to focus this slide on, your attention on, is that we've always really focused on automation execution, or the execution side of testing. How fast can I execute this test? Well, that's important. And I would say it's important eventually to optimize the execution of tests by optimizing the tests that I need to run when I check them in my integration, right? And that's good. That's good work. That helps, of course. It helps optimizing. But I think where we can get many more benefits to automate and to simplify and to speed testing up is to build the automation, building of the functional tests to be automated, right? And also, so that's meaning the design of the automation of functional tests and of the test data. If we can put some automation in that first step, that will help us because we can optimize the tests that we even create, not just execute, but create. That will really help us speed up our testing. And of course, this is where you build the scripts for your for the automation of your functional tests, for the non-functional tests, be that performance testing, be that security, and you might be doing that in a scriptless way or scripting or coding, depending on the type of tools they're using. If you're using open source, most likely you're a coder and you like to use frameworks, open source frameworks. But there's still going to be some exploratory testing that needs to be done, some manual testing on the edge cases, business edge cases, some technical edge cases. And again, this stage testers, can be developer testers, technical testers, and to some extent business testers. Again, it depends on the type of applications really that you are testing. It depends on the type of business you're in and the type of company. The level of involvement of a technical developer or business tester really changes depending on that. And this just shows you basically that, testing has to happen within each sprint, all of the types of testing, from feeding the sprint with the proper test data, dealing with the life cycle of test data within the sprint, refreshing it for the next sprint, running your unit testing of the code that you built, running any shift left performance testing on that code, any automated regression testing. Automated regression testing, you're creating regression tests as you move through the sprints. And you don't, there might be some of those regression tests will have to be rerun every time, but you might also have to run regression tests against other existing software that's out there through the integration testing. But basically, at the end of every sprint, that working software has to be tested. And it has to be tested as much as possible. If you're doing things really right and not many, and all of this, and this is really mature approach to software development, the end-to-end performance testing almost becomes, a ceremonial, right? Before you can release into production. And shift left performance testing, I've mentioned it many times. Here, I just want to kind of highlight to you what it means. It means that, product owners and developers become all stewards of performance. As a product owner, I will tell the developer how fast I can accept a page to show up, or how far, and then someone will figure out, well, what's the contribution of the backend system to this, and how, is there enough speed there? Developers might be profiling code, they might be running some smoke tests, they might be leveraging performance baselines that someone else gave them from the center of excellence, perhaps, and they might be using new tools. The old traditional performance testing tools might not work for developers and won't work for developers because they need to be very agile themselves. The tools need to be easily, you want to run these performance tests within the environment that the developers are working in. And maybe over time, end-to-end performance testing, wanes as the shift left becomes the norm. We're far from that right now, but that's where we're heading. And I'm not talking about theory here. United Airlines is a great example of how they've been, adopting and adapting performance testing into their early sprints and shifting performance to the left. And they measured this, and the outcome was that 80% of performance issues that usually happen in production dropped off because they were able to catch some, simple issues before they actually deployed into production because they were doing shift left performance testing. All right, version control and continuous integration. When we check in code, of course, there's version control. You're attaching now all the assets of tests. You're versioning them. You're versioning them with the code. You're versioning them with the code, the application code that the tests are part of. And if you're even building, infrastructure as code, that code can be also versioned. That's a very cool central part of this, to be able to really quickly, run automation and rerun automation. You know what to pick if you have the right versions of all of it together organized in a repository. And so it's the continuous integration tool that really starts orchestrating the tests. There's no test management tool anymore that orchestrates the tests. It's the continuous integration tool that does it. It will kick off unit tests. It will kick off the functional tests. It will kick off non-functional tests, and it will have automated gates to kind of push things back if there are bugs that need to be fixed right away. But everything is automated as much as possible. And the next step is it's not necessarily a step, because most of these things are done in parallel. I'm just like breaking them up this way to explain them, to share them with you. But basically the integration testing, I talked about service virtualization, but you can start doing integration testing as well as you build more components and more spins. And really, when we talk about DevOps, right, everybody sometimes get concerned about Agile and DevOps, because we have some certain types of compliance and governance issues that we want to, governance constraints that we have to, or governance procedures that we want to comply to. And really, you can still do that, because what we're saying is that we're automating that governance. That's what we want to try to do. Testing is part of that automated governance. You can release an automation in, a release. You can release automatically a piece of software into production, and you can put an automated gate on that release if you've automated all your tests, and you can see how many of those tests passed or failed, right? That automated gate will basically enable you to go to the next step, and it can be done in an automated fashion, and you can still, basically make sure that your controls are still working. And last but not least, we have the feedback loop, right? DevOps, I think one of the most important thing about DevOps, besides automation, besides shared goals between developers and operations and business, besides operations folks writing code instead of manually configuring things and so forth, is this the possibility of automating the feedback loop from production. And this is where, this is why production monitoring, or some people call this maybe testing in production, but basically you now also, as a developer, you want early on the developers, the testers, and the teams to have an idea of what's going on into production. How are the things that we're deploying behaving in production? Can I use the monitoring to maybe generate alerts? And alerts will tell me that there are parts of my software that I deployed that probably I didn't test enough, or that I'm not even using. So why test them at all? There's a lot of interesting insights that I can get back from that data, and I can automate all this, right? And this is where some AI and machine learning comes in, because in this overall loop, we're generating lots of data. There's a whole chain of tools that are part of the continuous delivery, continuous testing loop. And a lot of that data I can use to optimize the way I test, right? What I need to test and how I can test it. All the way to more sophisticated things like integrated A/B testing that many organizations do now. This is not just Spotify, right? I've written research around the Spotify approach, or how, in Spotify, they've been building software that's publicly described in many websites, and I published a research doc around that. They're using things like A/B testing, but even companies like British Telecom are using, A/B testing. Large organizations are using A/B testing in production, and that helps, of course, improving customer experience, because customer experience improvement testing is part of, the goal of testers. It's not just to find bugs anymore, but it's actually to find that customer experience, usability, and outcomes that are being deployed by an application. Are they, providing enough value or not? Testing is now getting involved into that, in those types of assessments. Now, yes, I have said we need to test more, but actually, I think the right way of saying this is we should be, and we can now also test smarter, right? And the way we can test smarter is by putting intelligence in this loop. I wrote a piece of research, I did an extensive research on how AI and machine learning can improve the way we test our current software, the software that we deliver today in the traditional way. I'm also running and writing a piece of research around how to test AI systems. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how can we use machine learning, AI, anything coming from that well to improve the way we test. Well, the research shows that there are many opportunities for that, right? It's early days, but basically from defect management, clustering, reducing mean time to repair with machine learning models that can tell us, using all that data, who can make a tester much smarter, can augment a tester to understand, classifying defects in clusters and therefore reducing mean time to repair, or eventually pointing back from a bug in production to the code that actually is responsible for that bug. We're starting to see startups building in that technology in testing. The test lifecycle optimization, as I said, by using again machine learning and all the data that's generated, I can find out in production which features are mostly used by my customers, and I can prioritize to test those instead of trying to test everything. And in any case, I won't have the time to test everything, so I have to make a choice, but I can make a smart choice. I can make an intelligent choice of what I need to test, and therefore help optimize the life cycle. It can contribute to increase the level of test automation and generate tests and optimizing tests. I can have machine learning telling me which tests to execute in each build instead of doing that, running them all. I can also, these are actually use cases that I found out through the research. Some of them are more real and reality, but some of them are, kind of coming and getting there. But unit test code generation, there's also efforts into trying to generate unit tests automatically from code, or generate API tests from code from a tool that provides functional testing and also generates API beyond the UI tests that are created, or visual testing, being able to do visual testing as a human being, because visual image recognition is one of the strong areas of AI, and that's technology we can use also to basically, increase the way we're testing. There's many more case studies. If you're a customer, Forrester customer, you can download that report to know more, or just ask for an inquiry, and I'm happy to share more of it. But basically, and then there's, leveraging all the production user experience monitoring, connecting user experience data with tests. And so maybe you have now the chance to say if something not only is correct, but is it also generating the right type of value? Is it improving user experience, right? And so there's lots of opportunities. This is the new world, I would say, of where testing is going, adding intelligence. So in a nutshell, I do think we need to test more. We definitely need to test better because we're slowing down. One of the slowdowns of developing faster. So we need to test faster, and I would add, we need to test smarter, right? To actually reduce the need to test more. So it's a little bit of a of an oxymoron here, but it really, the goal is we want to create more value, better quality for the increasing amount of software that we need to write. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I think we're going to go to questions.
Yes, Diego, I have sort of a multi-part question coming in. One of our attendees has said that if they find that most departments are customizing their implementation of Agile, and they find that Agile work can diminish, and that process can diminish over time. So what do you believe can help improve the Agile testing phase? And then what gets in the way sometimes where they're finding old waterfall approaches can actually work better. So where can Agile pick up?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. You asked me this question a couple of years ago, and I actually caught that when you read my biography, talking about system engagements. Well, I think a couple of years ago I would have said, yeah, start applying this on the systems of engagement sides, building mobile apps, building the front end. It's cool, you can do it there, but we knew, and we were always saying, you kind of need to go beyond that. We need to also apply more agility to modernizing the backend. So in other words, we need to modernize the backend. Now, Agile is not the solution to all the problems. That means also introducing, cloud and microservices architecture. There's a whole set of other things that need to happen that will get in the way to be Agile, right? So I think a mistake many organizations make is that introducing Agile alone, they think that they can now build better software faster. That's not the case. That's wrong. Agile, you can't be Agile. You can't have an Agile development process if you've got a siloed architecture on it, right? And if you want to keep the siloed architecture, you're better off using Waterfall, which is kind of an answer to your second part of the question, where do I apply Waterfall? For me, Waterfall should go away. It's actually going away. It's below the 30% in the 2017 survey, and I'm sure this year is going to be even lower. But it's a matter of learning and maturity, right? And you can't just eliminate Waterfall, or you can't become Agile overnight. And so there's a journey to go through. The goal is not to become, is not to be Agile 100%. Agile is the means to get to more agility, but it's not, the goal that organizations have to set. And testing, the other mistake that is done less and less, I think, is that testing was initially kind of not necessarily part of the Agile journey, but I think now it's more than 3 or 4 years that I'm seeing everybody gets it, that in a team, there's this concept of cross-functional teams where you've got all the relevant roles involved, and testers are part of that. The data shows that testers are, if you've got a team, let's say of 7 to 9 people in an Agile team, chances are you'll have 1 to 2 testers in that. And the variation between 1 to 2 is based on how much testing also developers take on in that team.
Mm-hmm. Great. Another question is, test automation typically targets what is broken or what one sees in the UI being tested. So how can we get better at predicting what new automated tests need to be added?
Right. I think I guess the question, if I understand it right, is that UI-led testing, sometimes you create, because the UI keeps changing, is where there is most change, especially at the beginning of a project. The test suite will, it's kind of hard to keep the test suite updated. There's a lot of work to do that. Traceability might be an issue. And so that's kind of the challenge of now testing and developing in parallel at the UI level. I must say that the tools have improved that a little bit, but it's not about just the tool. It's going beyond the user interface and doing more API testing. For example, if you're building a new application, right, chances are that if you've structured it in microservices and componentized it and you've got the right architecture approach, that's what matters for automation, is going, then you probably are going to avoid a lot of those the test suite breaking, because there's less changes required sprint over sprint, and there's less changes at the API level, which is kind of reflecting the process or the activities, the steps that the application is executing on, and those paths don't change as frequently as the UI does. So I think to overcome that issue, it is going beyond the, increasing the level of API testing and not just doing UI-led testing, and of course increasing the quality of UI-led tools, which is something slowly happening. But it's really about organizing and the way we construct automation is that's where you need developers sometimes, because it's building code, right? And they know a lot about the software delivery engineering process for building good code. Well, we need to build good automation that doesn't break and that is effectively executing and with enough traceability so that we know what to change as changes happen, because in Agile, changes do happen, and we want changes to happen. We want change to come in, because that's the whole point about Agile. But if you're not organized, if you're not version controlling your test assets, as I said earlier, if we're not, taking some of this strategy of going beyond the user interface and testing at the API level and testing UI only really when, we kind of have a little bit more of stable environment, then it's going to be hard to achieve better and higher levels of automation.
Great. Diego, you noted that developers spend approximately 50% of their time on automation, but thought that was too little. What's your general guidelines around percent and/or development team size, e.g., that is 1-to-1 or functional develop versus automation developer?
Well, there's a lot, that there's a consultant answer to that. It depends, and it depends a lot. I would say that, first of all, unit testing, I think the threshold for strong Agile teams is automating above 80% of everything that can be automated, of the code, that you're building, right? At least 80%. That would be the gate I would put to my teams. And maybe you gradually get there, but that's kind of where you need to get if you really want to deliver continuously and you need to deploy things faster into production. In terms of the ratio, I think it is, it can be 1-to-1, but I see more one tester to 2 developers. But again, this depends a lot on the type of application you're writing, right? If you're building a product that is, I don't know, an email system or an email user interface, probably you don't even need a business product owner, because developer technical people can figure out what that should look like and more or less the features that we need to build in and test them. But if you're building a, credit high risk portfolio management system, there's a lot of business logic there, and you can't delegate a developer to test that. He would have no clue. He might test only the happy paths. And so that's where you might have more involvement of a business tester or a technical tester that knows the business domain as well, sitting on the side, working with the developer, that might automate the scripts, but who writes the test cases, who drives what needs to be tested is from a tester. So, in the first case, you will have a lower ratio of testers, pure testers versus developers. In the second, case, you will have a higher ratio between those testers in the team being technical or business and the developer testers. I don't think there's a magic number. I say Agile is common sense with discipline. And I think if we apply common sense, you can get there.
Great. Last question, I think, for our day, maybe one more after this, but do you have suggestions on current ratios of having dedicated QA testers versus having testing done by developers?
I think some of that I answered in what I just said. Again, I think it's it really depends. The data that I see is that if you have a team of 7 to 9 people, right, an Agile team of 7 to 9, typically you're going to have a product owner in that team involved. You're going to have a Scrum Master or Agile coach. You're going to have 1 to 2 testers. You're going to have 2 to 3, 4 developers, and basically that's the team you have, right? And the ratio, but the ratio can vary depending on the skills. There are, I said, developers don't like to test. Well, not all of them, most of them. Right? But we need to break that down and into the different types of tests. Right? Now you need to look at unit testing. Well, that's entirely on the developer's task. If you look at functional testing, that's where you bring in the technical tester. Well, actually, even in unit testing, when, I see organizations that, because they're not doing enough and it's a problem to get enough unit testing done, they start measuring the unit testing with tools like SonarQube, etc. But someone sets those tools up for them and does the reports, and you still have a tester probably involved in doing some of that management type of work to help the developer kind of maybe use a self-service to see how much of his unit tests pass or didn't pass. But then you've got to figure out for functional testing, what the ratio is, and that's, I think, the use case I described on the previous question. I think I explained that, and it depends on the type of application, where some are more technical type of apps, some are more business type of apps that need business know-how, business skills. That's when when there's business knowledge needed, and you need to test, you need to select the right test type of data, business data, you want to see the outcomes. You're going to have a higher ratio of the business and technical tester compared to the developer in that case. But all within those small teams of 8 to 10 people maximum. And so, I think it's actually easier to estimate and calculate how many testers you need in an organization once you have structured the different squads and agile teams with an area, of a shared, you still have a centralized, maybe shared center of excellence, but it's a much smaller team that is consulting to these. So we need to add those, to the equation of the ratio, of course, but their goal is to kind of, help these teams get testing done faster in some sort of a standard way, trying to at least leverage and harvest the good practices that the different teams around the organization are applying, right? It's not that we're against standards in Agile. It's that standards get defined in a different way. It's a bit like it's a Darwinian approach. The best things that some teams are doing are the ones that will pop up and can be harvested and reused across the organization.
Great. Diego, as always, thank you for your highly engaging, insightful presentation and perspectives. We greatly appreciate it. And thank you to all of our attendees today as well. Again, you will be receiving a recording of today's presentation within 48 hours, and we look forward to your joining a future SOS Labs webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.